Hello, this is Omni Dasuki. I'm the editor of the HR Observer. Today I'm speaking with Erin Meyer, a professor of management practice in the Organizational Behavior Department at INSEAD, which is a school that I would love to join at some point. It's not a promotion. Um, but Erin talks about cross-cultural management, organizational culture, intercultural negotiations. And Erin, welcome.
Thank
It's very
you.
lovely.
Thank you, Amnia. So nice to be here with you. I mean, I just define culture very simply that culture is the personality of a group. So like in the same way, Amnia, if I get to know you very well, then I can describe your individual personality. Like, I don't know, maybe you're outspoken and extroverted or whatever it might be, emotionally expressive, that we can also describe the culture of a group. And that could be the culture of a generation. It could be the culture of an organization. That's organizational culture. Sorry, the personality of generation or the personality of an organization. But I study the personality of nations. So the personality of countries and of world cultures and how the personality of those different nations impacts us as individuals when we are raised in those environments, and then what happens when, of course, we are working with people who were raised in other parts of the world than we are.
Right. So why there is culture conflict? Why are there culture conflicts? Why couldn't just people be like, okay, I respect your identity, I respect my identity, we're good?
Yeah, well, I think that it's very complicated when we're working internationally to figure out what is cultural and what is personal. And, like you give a presentation to a group of people from another country and they respond in a way that surprises you. And then at the end of the meeting, how do you know? Like, how do you know? Oh, was it because that guy is angry with me or because that woman is difficult to work with? Or is there something about the way that I presented the material or maybe about the way that I expressed myself that led to this type of reaction? Is there something cultural going on that I could be aware of in order to be more strategic or empathic? So I believe in our global world, it's really critical that we're able to figure out what is personal and what is cultural. And even more so in a place like the UAE. I mean, I think such a fascinating environment because, of course, you've got people from all over the world who are there, like in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi, working together, but who have all been raised, well, not all, but largely been raised in other countries, which leads to a lot of this, like kind of trying to tease out what's the cultural and what's the personal. So my framework helps do that.
Right. I wanted to ask about that. How can they actually identify what is cultural and what is personal?
Yeah, so I have a framework that I call culture mapping, and that breaks culture down into 8 behavioral scales. So we look at things like how do we build trust differently in different cultures, or how do we make decisions differently in different parts of the world. And then through about 180,000 interviews that we've conducted in about 64 countries, we have these countries that are positioned up and down the scales. So then you can map out one country or one culture up to another. So if you were working, for example, I don't know, across, like if you're French and you're working with someone from Brazil, then you can map out the cultural differences and you can see, okay, well, like both cultures are relationship oriented, but Brazil much more relationship oriented than France. Or that when it comes to disagreement, that Brazilian culture tends to not like to have like open disagreements. It's likely to really harm the relationship, versus in France, where if you have a really open disagreement in a meeting, it's likely to make us closer. That's the disagreeing scale. So the more that we understand those patterns and the more we study them, and that's what we're going to be talking about in my master class with you, the more we can become sophisticated at understanding how to analyze the cultural versus the personal.
But are all, I mean, you've met a lot of people. Is everyone really into understanding that this is actually culture, or the busy world of the business doesn't give people the opportunity to actually want to understand? Or
Well, I think that successful global leaders do. I mean, it's been such an interesting thing that's happened to us since COVID, which is that before COVID, I do believe that a lot of the world was not really in touch with people from other countries. So perhaps this information was actually irrelevant to them, and that's fine. You know, if you are working with people who were raised in the same environment, in the same society that you were, then you don't need to know But now that we are, I think, largely working in these environments where we get up in the morning and maybe we open up some kind of virtual media and we see faces from people throughout the world who are right there on our computer screen. It's so easy to think to judge other people's behaviors from our own cultural lens instead of recognizing, oh yeah, well, I think what he's trying to say is this because I understand a little bit about the cultural background that he's coming from. So I do believe that this is becoming much, much more important and urgent for all of us to understand.
Right. And just to elaborate further on this, how do you think that different cultures can actually push businesses to grow at this moment in time?
Yeah, well, like, let me give you an example. Let's think about something very specific, very simple, like feedback. Okay, so of course, if we are in a management position, we have to give feedback to our employees and maybe even to our colleagues, give them advice and ideas about how to improve their work. The appropriate way to give that advice is very different from one country to another. So maybe I'll give you 3 examples. I mean, in the US, we are taught on the one hand to be explicit with the feedback. We're really a feedback culture. And I think because we're so explicit in the US, we're really like stereotyped in other countries as being very direct. But the American culture also teaches this giving 3 positives with every negative, catching people doing things right. So actually, Americans give more positive feedback and stronger positive feedback than any other culture in the world. And when they give negative feedback, they tend to wrap it with positive messages. Okay, in France. So I'm originally from the US, but I've lived in France for 20 years. In France, positive feedback usually goes unsaid. So if I don't say anything, you're doing great. Now, negative feedback, I may give a little bit more strongly, and I might give it with a little bit more passion. So then, like, I had a situation, I'm working with this French woman. She has an American boss. The American boss gives her feedback in the way we do in the US. This is great. This is fabulous. This needs to change. And she thinks, wow, that's the best performance review I've ever received. But she doesn't make any changes. Later on, he's really frustrated that she's not listening to him. I mean, that's critical. Now she's lost her face and her boss. Maybe she's even going to get fired. And then, of course, another method might be what we would find in less direct countries. So, for example, Thailand, where there may be a tendency to pass the negative between the lines. And we might do that by saying the good and leaving out the bad. So, for example, I was presenting at a conference in Bangkok, and the coordinator asked me to send her 2 photos and a video so she could present the conference, which I did. And then I called her up. Do you have what you need? She said, the photos were excellent. Thank you. So then I said, oh, well, would you like me to send you another video? And she said, well, if you have one, that would be wonderful. You see how she was able to give me that message without her ever saying I didn't like the video. Right. So I do believe it's so critical in any work environment that we're able to understand these patterns and adapt our style so that we can both work more effectively with clients and suppliers and also motivate our employees to get things done in the way that is the most effective.
Right. And is there a magic formula, for example, to say this is going to be is the American way going to be working with these kind of employees or with these employees from this culture?
Yeah, well, wouldn't that be great? Like if there was one way that worked around the world, but maybe we would lose out on some of the interest of the whole thing. No, I think the magic formula is that we as leaders in organizations or as anybody who's working in an international situation, we need to be aware. We need to understand the differences in the way to give feedback and the way, and what about our own style is cultural, so that we can just make some simple little tweaks in order to be effective, not just tweaks in the way we deliver the information, but also tweaks in the way that we feel the information coming at us. Maybe I'll give you another example of this that comes up all the time, like who speaks in meetings and why. So, I mean, I think anyone who's worked in a multicultural environment knows that some cultures cultures talk a lot more than others do. And one example would be, okay, my own culture, the American culture, we are a very talkative people in a work environment. And that's largely linked to our education system, because in
Right.
the US, we are taught in school to speak up, speak up. So, I mean, we have of course, we have a participation grade in the U.S. And I learned as a child in Minnesota, where I was raised, I learned that I needed to have my hand almost raised even before I knew what the question was, because it didn't matter if what I said was right or wrong or thought through or stupid. Actually, what mattered was that I contributed. And of course, I learned that, like almost every American child, day in and day out in school. Now compare that to someone who's in Thailand, or someone who's in India or Saudi Arabia, where children are much more likely to learn, okay, I speak once I've thought through what I want to say, and I have something intelligent to contribute. And then or perhaps even when I'm called on. So now we've got these situations where some people are talking all the time, and other people are waiting for an opportunity to speak that never comes. And of course, if we don't understand that, if we don't understand why different cultures speak up and why other cultures are quiet, and if we come from a more talkative culture, then we're likely to think, oh, well, those people didn't speak because they have nothing to say, which means that they don't have good leadership capacity or they don't support me. And if I come from a culture where we're more likely to listen carefully, think about what we want to say before we talk, then we may feel that those people from those talkative cultures, that they are show-offs, that they're selfish, and certainly they've got poor leadership capacity. So again,
Right.
a very simple example of how cultural differences may play out, I think, every day in our multicultural world. And if we're aware of those, we can think about, like, what strategies can we use in order to get that balanced participation and hear that voice of diversity.
I mean, now I'm going to be very cautious about my meetings. Now that I was reflecting on that, I was like, do I talk a lot or talk less? And I certainly talk a lot. How about technology? So one of the main aspects of talks now when it comes to culture is that technology is changing culture, or it's, lingering the lines between that. You'd imagine someone working in a multinational company is aware that there are different cultures, that people come from different backgrounds, don't take things personally, but I don't know if that is the case. So where does, you know, going on a Zoom call or, messaging people quickly play a role in actually blurring the lines further?
Yeah, well, I think that it's made the world really, really complicated, because it used to be that most people who had international exposure were traveling to other countries, or maybe like in the UAE, actually moving to those other countries. And of course, when we travel somewhere, we have a lot of visual cues that help us to understand the context so we can figure out what's cultural and what's personal. Like a very simple example of that would be, like, let's say you go to India, and when you're in India, maybe you're in southern India, and you see, oh, like everyone's kind of doing this thing with their head, like moving their head, not just up and down or back and forth, but ear to ear, shoulder to shoulder, while they're listening to me. So I get, okay, that's a cultural signal. People are listening to me. But now I'm on a Zoom call, and I've got just one colleague from India. So that person starts doing that. Now I have communication without context. I mean, I don't have the context to help me figure out what's cultural. So I assume it's all personal. And now I read that person's body language as it would mean something in my own culture. That guy disagrees with me, or he's not certain that what I said is thought through. So I do believe it's made things much more, let's say, complicated or interesting. And it also means that we have to be much more thoughtful about understanding these differences, because we don't often have the cultural cues as to what everybody's doing to tease out the cultural versus the personal.
Right. That makes your role a little bit more complicated as well, because correct me if I'm wrong, the world is a really complex place, and being thoughtful in a complex place is actually not that easy. So how do you advise businesses to just understand people and be people?
Yeah, well, of course it's not easy, but human behavior, people leadership is not simple. It's but we can of course break it down and we can make it easier. Let me just give you like a very simple example of this. So you are in Dubai. I was working with an Emirati organization a while ago, and one of the Emirati managers came up to me during a break, and he told me this story. He said, I have an American boss, and in my culture, right, like in the Emirati culture, if we have a discussion on the telephone and we make some decisions verbally, that would be enough for me, especially if we have a little bit of a relationship. And then if you get off of the phone, and you put into writing everything we've decided, and you send that written recap to me, that would be like a signal to me that you don't trust me. And he
Right.
said, but my American boss, he's sending me every time we have a telephone call, he sends me a recap. So I was taking that really poorly, like as a really like a signal my boss doesn't trust me. And then finally he said, okay, so finally I just like got the courage together, and I asked for a meeting, and I said to him, like I get it, like you don't trust me, this is what's happening. And he said, and my boss was like totally surprised. He said, no, no, no. In the US, we do that all the time. It's just considered being a good communicator. And I
Right.
think, that just shows that, of course, human behaviors are complicated. But the more that we understand why people that we're working with act the way they do or have different reactions, the more we can find simple solutions. And with this case, okay, like once we understand it, no big deal, right? I mean, the Emirati guy, he can get, oh, I see, I'm having a cultural reaction, but it's actually not reflective of my actual worry. And the boss also now aware, oh yeah, I'm not going to do that in the future. Now I know if I'm working with clients or with employees from Emirati or from the UAE, that maybe I should be more thoughtful and not just put everything in writing as
Right.
standard procedure. So a little bit of awareness can help us simplify things a lot and know what to do.
Right. That's a lot of things to think about. Erin, I would love to meet you in person once you're here, but I would like to end this conversation by just asking you, do you have quick tips on how to understand cultures when you have not been exposed to so many of them?
Yeah, so what we're going to do in our session together in May is we're going to go through this kind of culture mapping methodology, and we'll explore how do we communicate effectively in different cultures, how do we give feedback effectively, how do we build trust, what does a good leader look like in different environments. I'll give you a quick example of that one. So I've been working with this Dutch company. So the Netherlands is one of the most egalitarian countries in the world. So they really believe in the Netherlands, like the best boss is like a facilitator among equals, right? Like just the best CEO, just two small steps up from the janitor, right? So the best boss is someone who really pushes decision making down in the organization and acts like he's just or she's just one of the crowd. So I had this guy from Mexico who was now managing a team in the Netherlands. He said to me, "Oh my gosh, managing Dutch people is absolutely incredible because they don't care at all that I'm the boss. So I go into these meetings, I'm trying to roll out my strategy, and people are challenging me and contradicting me and taking my ideas off in other directions. Sometimes I just want to get down on my knees and plead with them. Please don't forget that I'm in charge." Okay, so that's one of the dimensions that we're going to look at: how to lead effectively in different environments, how to make decisions effectively. And we're also going to look at some things that are quite a bit more in depth, like how we're actually trained to analyze differently in different school systems in the world, and how that may lead us to both give presentations in different formats and to be more try to influence more effectively. So we'll do that, and I'll give the group my link to my culture mapping tool at the end of it, so they can click on whatever countries they're working with, see them mapped out, and we'll also do a personal assessment so everyone can respond to some questions about themselves, get their personal map, which they can then compare to various country maps, find out if you are living in the right country or not. Very important moment for everybody.
Thank you very much, Erin. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Loved talking to you, to be honest.
Thank you, Omnia. Such a pleasure. Looking forward to joining you all in the UAE in just a couple of months.